Entrepreneurship is solving meaningful problems.
Sure.
Right? There are people who are entrepreneurs because in a way that somehow provides the person who's doing it with the ability to create something meaningful for the world. And hopefully also, the acquisition of resources to allow them to continue to innovate. I think that paradigm in and of itself will shift because with blockchain technology, if you think about it this way really simply, data is a non-scarce digital asset. And blockchain technology, not only our data, but the data that exists in the air, in the ocean, all biological life forms, the data of space, the data that we're gathering in rocket propulsion, whatever we'd like to study. Data is a non-scarce digital asset, and we can design blockchain economic systems to have inherently scarce token sets. So if we have an inherently scarce economy with an asset that will never be scarce and is valued by the regeneration of that information, I think we're moving into an age that could allow us to live our lives free of the constraints that we perceive to be structured around resources and allow us to actually structure our life around meaning and purpose.
Voice and exit. How you feeling about it?
Good.
Are you exiting?
I was definitely voicing. I don't know if I'm exiting. I think this is the last place you'd actually want to exit from. And that's what's so interesting about the experience, is it's really the idea of the mic drop. Voice and exit was the mic drop before the mic drop was a mic drop.
Was the thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
literally.
Fair.
And so do I want to bring voice? Yes, absolutely. But do I want to exit only from rooms where I do not feel that my substance or my sense of humor is intellectually or emotionally appreciated? And so, no, it's...
No, you want to enter this room. I get that.
Oh, yeah.
But what are you actually exiting? I know a little bit about you and some of the work that you're doing with culture and all that kind of stuff. And I'm enormously interested in that because I and a group of us realistically through a mastermind are making something called freedom culture. So we want to proliferate this movement and allow people to kind of decentralize, allow people to come together, allow them to collaborate, and allow people to spread their unique gifts to the world.
For sure.
So with that said, what is it that drives you to be you? What drives you to what is making you exit the current system and talk so highly and be so immersed in building the new one?
Violence. It's exiting violence, and it's exiting a paradigm where rather that violence, I don't think most people realize that we live in a world where one of the largest, outside of just institutional violence, other than institution, the other biggest proponent, purveyor, salesman of violence is your own mind, right? And I think that the violence that exists because of the inability for us to have a society that allows us to express our emotions honestly and vulnerably in a way where we could receive support from surrounding communities, regardless of whether or not those people are your friends, your family, some people you randomly meet at a bar who don't have creepy, gross incentives. We should all, as a human race, Darwin didn't actually say survival of the fittest in the way that it's interpreted by dogmatic understandings of what that principle is meant to mean. What Darwin actually said 2 chapters ahead of when he gave this big, long quote about weaker species and human beings caring for the sick and is that humans species with the highest capacity for empathy. He said sympathy. Qualities we now identify as altruism, compassion, reciprocity, that these are the most likely to survive during times of hardship. So what I'm exiting is the idea that we're in this alone, is the idea that having more resources than everyone else is somehow going to make you happier, provide you with meaning, or fulfill you, because it never will. You'll live your life in a way that is very empty. You could own everything in the world and still never find anything that you actually need. And most people who accumulate resources to that extreme, they're driven by something that is missing from within. And so what I'm really exiting is a history of violence. And I would like for everyone to come with me on that journey. And the way I feel that we will accomplish that is by incentivizing human to system, systems to system, and human to human, and system to system interaction around reciprocity.
So obviously, when a movement is happening, we think about we want everybody to exit alongside us. But I personally believe that entrepreneurs, people who are also even very talented with technologies, tend to lead some of these components, at least in the modern day times.
Yeah.
Would you agree that they are the first people we need to exit?
I think
do we have to change the culture of like entrepreneurship first, and then all of a sudden these systems that you're talking about that need to kind of interact and play together, are they the people who are going to lead that change?
I don't know, because I think that the culture of entrepreneurship is so dynamic. Like, we can't define entrepreneurship by saying entrepreneurship is solving meaningful problems.
Sure.
Right? There are people who are entrepreneurs because in a way that somehow provides the person who's doing it with the ability to create something meaningful for the world. And hopefully also the acquisition of resources to allow them to continue to innovate. I think that paradigm in and of itself will shift, because with blockchain technology, if you think about it this way really simply, data is a non-scarce digital asset. And blockchain technology, not only our data, but the data that exists in the air, in the ocean, all biological life forms, the data of space, the data that we're gathering in rocket propulsion, whatever we'd like to study. Data is a non-scarce digital asset, and we can design blockchain economic systems to have inherently scarce token sets. So if we have an inherently scarce economy with an asset that will never be scarce and is valued by the regeneration of that information, I think we're moving into an age that could allow us to live our lives free of the constraints that we perceive to be structured around resources, and allow us to actually structure our life around meaning and purpose. And I think when we are able to do that, that's when we will be able to transcend this current paradigm. For me, it's not about exiting, because I think exiting still creates conflict between people, and that's why with this system,
us versus them, right?
Are you an entrepreneur because you're saying like, I hate yellow cabs, like I want to Uber, and then all of a sudden you create this like monstrous cool company. That's wonderful and all, but like also there are cab drivers who have lives and families that are essentially living as Burmese slaves in America who escaped an oppressive political paradigm that are now in $3 million worth of debt to the city of Chicago because they had to purchase their gold medal license because it was the only economic opportunity they viably or visibly had within that environment. And so, I think this is a serious, I think there are serious questions to ask, and is it really about exiting? I think it's about transcending. Because when you transcend, what happens is you take the people in the old system and you say, I'm not leaving you behind, okay? I'm bringing you with me. You can come on this journey, but also transcendence means that rather than having people follow you, you say, I am transcending. Should you care to transcend, that is a journey you will have to take within.
What's interesting about that is, to me, is that we have a culture of follow, though.
Yeah.
We have a culture right now that is like, follow my ICO, follow my social media platform, follow me on Instagram, Facebook, all these other things. And I understand the value of that to some degree. I mean, we do it when it allows us to stay connected. How or why should somebody follow you into your culture and what you're creating? I mean, and I know it's not just you creating it. In fact, maybe give us a little bit of context as to how you're looking to co-create and how you're looking to create that.
They shouldn't follow, they should lead. I am not a boss or a manager. I am an artist. And when you are an artist and you work with other artists, you might have like an apprentice. But most of the people that you are surrounded with are, other artists, or whether they're artists in their own right and they're using money as an art form, or this as an art form, or that as an art form, or science as an art form, whatever you care to choose. I mean, I think I would encourage more people to lead than I would to follow. I would say it's about the alignment of our principles. And when we're able to center ourselves in the alignment of our principles and our ability to constantly be critical, to remain open-minded, that people say, what's a popular phrase? Strong opinions loosely held, I think is the popular phrase around that idea or terminology, to say, I believe this to be true, and if I meet a person who can provide me with evidence that I find to be so strong and counterintuitive to my own set of beliefs, then I am willing to question what I believe is real. Because the minute you base a society on the structure of belief over the structure of what is actual reality, is when you end up in a paradigm where information asymmetry provides large capital gains to those in power and also essentially creates a new class of slaves. Asymmetry has actually created human oppression consistently through our generational dynamic, and whether that asymmetry is in the asymmetry of property or ownership or opportunity, every innovation that we have, people will attempt to exploit for asymmetry, to create asymmetry.
Which is happening right now.
Everywhere. It's happening in blockchain. I mean, it's
totally
human behavior.
Yeah. It's happening in Bitcoin. And I mean, I heard you speaking earlier. You were saying, well, people, when Bitcoin came out, everyone was stoked about it. But then all of a sudden Ethereum comes out and people start fighting and saying, well, no, don't go and create that. We need this to grow. Because we take agency over the choices that we made as individuals and then hope that everybody else follows that same trend.
Yeah.
Because realistically, when you say, I want people to lead, what that also has to kind of create is that people need to follow. It's a weird dynamic. There needs to be some level of following in some way, shape, or form. I mean, even somebody listening to this right now is to some degree consuming versus creating.
I think there needs to be a level of contribution and participation. So the ecosystem that I design is inherently infrastructure agnostic and works with pretty much everyone that's doing anything. And essentially puts all of that into one place. Like we had the internet and then we had the browser. And so for me, it's more about organizing and aggregating all of these various and disparate pieces of infrastructure into one place where people can actively co-create and collaborate. And rather than following, I think it's more about following will have less value in more evolved systems than participation and contribution.
Agreed.
And so I think that is, but it's really at a baseline level that the incentives in blockchain are primitive. Like, we're still an early adopter stage of this technology, and I don't think anyone has anything figured out. I think it's a $500 billion research project that will become a multi-trillion-dollar research project. And we just have to embrace that no matter how much we learn, we'll never have it all figured out. And the minute that we do have it all figured out, we will transcend what exists to such an extent that the idea of existence as we know it will be a concept that will be so foreign to us that it will seem that we are amoeba in our current state.
So, beautifully said, first of all. What are you creating, and why should anybody give a shit?
So what I'm creating is called culture. And it's really the idea that the future of government is culture, the way our society is starting to organize rather than looking at nations as this consolidate control mentality. I gave an example earlier of the ant and the spider and the bumblebee.
I love that.
And that the ant is essentially acquiring as much property as they can and as many resources as they can, and they're storing them in vaults built in an environment that is essentially not just serving the queen, but it's benefiting the queen in the purpose of the ever-expanding colony and colonization of the land, and that's the corporation. And then you have the spider, which ensnares the innocent victims in its web and makes its material of Kevlar is the strongest material on Earth, or one of the strongest materials on Earth. And the spider ensnares and entraps innocent victims, and they're completely and totally ruthless, and that is the geographical nation state ensnaring within its self-spun borders people who otherwise have no choice. And in many instances creates innocent victims with a research and development budget that's large enough to create the strongest material on Earth. And then there's the honeybee. And the honeybee uses its innate abilities and powers to regenerate something that benefits the entire ecosystem around them. They're the prime examples of the level of interdependency that exists within our Earth. And so what I build is culture, and culture is the idea that the future of the way that we organize should be more like the honeybee, and rather than consolidate and control mentalities, if we continue to keep blockchains as an open and public ledger, that we will continue to increase the amount of access that people will have to opportunity. So culture is really a movement to provide people around the world who are self-sovereign individuals with access to different communities that can provide them with not only economic opportunities, but the ability to grow their skill set from within the framework of a social context that they feel comfortable within, or from within the framework of a social context that they would like to grow within, because that's really how things work. You don't go to college, even today. Going to college to get an education, unless you're continuing to pursue a career in academia, is fruitless. You're going to college to pay for access to a social network. And so if you're paying for access to a social network, why would you do that when you could just pay to go to an event and you could meet people that might be more meaningful for the evolution of your particular career than you would going to an area where you're forced to confine to someone's institutional paradigm of what makes you an intelligent person. Right? People are intelligent in different ways, and we are inherently social animals. And so enabling both access to that opportunity, and from within enabling that access, enabling access that allows us to inquire and enhance the use of our skills in different settings so that we can fulfill not only our purpose as an individual, our higher purpose or our higher self, but we can fulfill a purpose that is a shared purpose from within different communities that we align with, who share our higher values. When we say, I loved doing this on my own, and now I want to work with this group of people to come together to meaningfully solve this problem in a way that I could have never done by myself.
I literally feel like you're speaking my language. I heard you speaking alien
Spanish?
earlier.
Is it
Yeah, Spanish, exactly.
Yeah, thought so. Sometimes if you go into it, it's like...
No, but legitimately you're speaking my language.
Spanish.
We just switch up.
Yeah.
We'll put the captions in Spanish on Facebook. No, but realistically, you're actually totally speaking my language because, one of the things that I mentioned freedom culture.
Yeah.
Which is to empower and encourage all individuals to spread their unique gifts to the world.
Yeah.
That's what we came up with. It's not that I came up with it. It was a collective group of us that were building an eco-village out in Montreal, and now it's spread to other locations.
Cool.
And realistically, we hosted this kind of gathering, a mastermind of sorts, where we hand-selected a bunch of people who actually told you about it, and David and I and whatever had spoken about it with you. What was really emergent in that field of 115 people gathered in the an eco-village deep in the jungles, way far removed from let's say the status quo.
Yeah.
What kind of emerged is that we needed a collective flag.
Yeah. Yep.
We needed something that we can all champion.
The symbol.
But the symbol, but a symbol that a collective flag to me is like the word justice, for example, is a collective flag. Right,
yeah.
And that's one word. Love is a collective flag. No one person owns it. No one person has agency over that thing.
Yes.
We cannot control it. Not only within ourselves, but within society and within people in other ways. So realistically, what we have to create, in a sense, as a we, right? Yeah. When I turns to we, even illness turns to oneness. If we adopt a flag and we remove the center of that flag, and we say, look, this is not mine. This mastermind that we hosted, this culture that you created, isn't necessarily me. It's we, and that's how that can actually flourish. Yeah. And the way I see it is when we step out of the middle, because you do need to create the container, right? If you're creating culture right now, the container needs to be set. There needs to be parameters to the container. There has to be a manifesto of sorts, if you will. And once that manifesto is adopted, and it's adopted by a wide collection of people, whatever version of wide you want to determine. If you just step out of that container, remove the container, and allow people to plug into the container, then that's how we do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet we keep not doing that. You see, the technology of blockchain comes out, and then we just don't. Why? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like we're recreating the exact same paradigm in some ways, and not everybody. That is not fair to say. Yeah, I don't think you're doing that. But the idea is, why? Why do we keep repeating it?
We've starved people from their ability to engage with their own creative potential, and freedom of thought is the real answer as to why. And the thing about a movement, and this is what I say about culture, is that culture is not a company, it's a movement.
Yes.
Because a company, if a company leaves or changes management or whatever, I'm creating a thing where I'm like spinning a top and I'm just going like this, and it's just gonna spin forever.
Yes.
And so it's one of those situations where people are deprived from a very early age. Do you remember being a kid? And like you'd like start to fall asleep and you'd like look at the stuff on your wall and you'd like see almost moving pictures, or like you just randomly look at like a shape in your bed and you'd imagine that shape was a dragon, and then you'd go into your mind's eye, or like you'd read a book. And at a certain point when you'd be reading, the entire world would just literally fade away. You wouldn't even realize that your eyes were moving across a page anymore, because you'd be so deep in the creative meditation of the book
that you're not even reading
anymore. You're literally just imagining. And we have actually robbed generations from their real potential to advance society mechanically, which is what we needed at the time. Yes. The world goes from what I call like period, it's like expansion and contraction, or periods of flow and organization, or creativity and calculation. However you'd like to phrase this, this is actually a pattern of natural law that exists within our broader cosmology. And so that's actually the larger reason why. It's not to say let's place blame on all of these people and say we've had all these institutions deprive people. It's more to say from a broader cosmological perspective, we've just ended an age called the Kali Yuga, which is the end of what I call the golden calf stage. It's a Hindu perception. The Yuga is a Hindu perception of time, and it's staged into yugas, and the Satya Yuga is the golden age where gods and goddesses reign. They're 4 yugas, and the Satya Yuga is essentially the period of time where we have an increase in like the degradation of principles, a rise in materialism, the worship of false idols. This has happened several times before, and then we have these enlightened societies like you see with the pyramids that happened in Cusco and in Mexico and in ancient Egypt and in China, in Giza. So there are these periods of enlightenment where you essentially have, if you look at the sacred geometry embedded not only into the pyramids but into the faces of the structures that were carved in Egypt, they're literally, you can take a face, you can crop it in half, take one side of the face, flip it, so you have one side of the face overlaid as both sides, and then you can overlay that image of perfect symmetry with the actual Egyptian structure, and it is identical. That's unbelievable. We can't even do that today. We can do that with a computer. Humans did this with their hands. And this isn't a coincidence.
No.
It's actually because of something that is broader and more intensely based on our cosmos and our relationship with not only the energy of our planet, but the energy of the way our planet interacts and shifts within the broader cosmology of being and of things. And so we're entering into that age now. It's what I call, we're merging into the age of Eden. And that's why so many of these technologies that are gearing us, and we'll go through the cycle again.
Of course.
And we'll continue to survive, and we'll continue to go in that upward spiral. But thankfully, we're alive now.
Yes.
And that's good. And I think, I think every human being has said that for every generation throughout the course of human history. But I'm going to say it for this generation. So we can look at the future and see that, yeah, of course, nothing ever works out the way everyone imagines that it will. But some things will turn out right, and that'll be great.
Well, I think we've moved, we are moving through the age of, in a sense, structural violence to structural flourishing.
Yeah.
We've kind of transitioned in that, and I think the biggest transition that is ingrained and is kind of now slowly but surely dying away, and what we need to reteach, forget education in the traditional sense, what we actually have to learn as a species and as humans, let's say, is decentralized thinking.
Yeah.
We actually have to understand that if we can, we have to adopt a mindset of we, because we grew up saying, oh, I'm a special cookie, and everyone gets a medal, and everybody. We kind of grew up in this scenario, and it's not a bad thing. I'm not like, what I'm trying to say is we grew up in a scenario where we were told to worry about
I would say it's an integral me. And it's an integral me and an integral we. It's a combination, because not all people, like if you grew up in Scandinavia. If you grew up in a country where you, from a young age, were in an environment where the country provided social benefits.
I grew up in Canada, so
or
yes.
if you grew up in even more, I think, extreme in like Scandinavian countries or in Eastern countries, if you go into Japan, it's one of the most. I'm not kidding you when I say I felt as though I was telepathically communicating with people on the train, because the amount of emphasis that people in Japan, Japanese citizens, or people who are culturally identify as Japanese, place on subtext, the emphasis of an understanding of subtext is, it's like being constantly in theater, except everyone around you is aware of the illusion of reality, and they're all aware of how everyone else is participating in the play.
Yes.
It's literally unbelievable. So I would say that there are societies who already have a we mentality.
Yes.
And it's the shifting of, McLuhan talks about this as like the shifting of the Eastern and the Western mentality. But I think it's about understanding the integral me. And that, for me, balances it out across countries that are already more collectivist minded, the enlightened integral me, and countries that are radically individual. And yeah, it is from me to we is definitely catchy. It's like, I think about it as when I was growing up, there were two channels that played back to back, and they were me and we. It was the Men's Entertainment Network and the Women's Entertainment. And I think what that represents for me in a broader context is that we're shifting our society into what people identify as the sacred, divine, feminine consciousness. And that is a really, some people would say it's a fluffy word. Others would say it's like a really spiritual contextualization, depending on how you view it. And I'm definitely way involved in the spiritual realms, but I just want to be considerate of everyone's perspective on what that means. But it's actually that we're shifting into an age where we are going to be enabled through creations like artificial, and of course this all connects to the intelligence of the cosmos. Artificial intelligence and automation are enabling us to reach our creative potential like never before, and in turn, because they're going to be automating so many of these functions, increasing our capacity for human empathy, and our ability to generate innovation without being held back by the constraint of excess materialism. So I do believe that that age and the me to we also represents an element of merging, and this doesn't mean like only women. It means merging into a consciousness that, in the nature of Dionysus and Apollo, are the best examples, because a Dionysian consciousness is very much about the bacchanal. But to this very like and I also don't want to say Art Nouveau, but the variant between structure and flow. And we're merging back into flow. And I think a lot of that flow, a lot of creativity has to do with we, because we are connecting into our shared potential. No one has ever done anything meaningful truly alone. And I think that we will be enabled through many different contexts.
It's embracing the chaos. In some ways, it's embracing a sense of surrender to that creative force that no one of us can create alone, no one of us can control. And yet together we can dance, together we can play, you know what I mean? Together we can be a part of that in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think even within the, I would actually say it's also surrendering to, I would say it's ignoring the chaos and surrendering to serendipity.
Fair.
Yeah, but everyone has their own.
That does sound better.
But everyone grows in a different way, and that also structures the way in which you have to have a balance. Because I do know people who want to surrender to the chaos, right? And I do know people who they experience all of these things, like every little thing goes wrong, and then they're just like, you just say, I'm going to let it go. Yeah. And that's one way of saying I'm surrendering to it. But rather than even just surrender, I just say, it's as though the chaos is an unaffected variable of my perception on the serendipity in life. It's about not letting, for me, the chaos distract you from your higher purpose, because your intention in the world will carry you forward into what you are truly seeking. And maybe I would encourage more scientists to begin to understand tools and measurements for us to gain a broader context around the way that human energy interacts with the field of consciousness. Now granted, I understand that's a big ask. We don't necessarily, it's a big ask. We don't necessarily have the tools to discover this yet. I mean, I think we're working on it with the neural nets. We do have a device from MIT that, through measuring your brainwaves, can actually move. Like if you're looking at a screen and you're thinking certain things like move, left, right, select, or if you're thinking about certain cereals or as you're going through the store, it can actually read the signals in your brain and translate those into language.
And we're also able to measure them to some degree in a collective sense with like the random number generators and certain elements happening where all of these random number generators are spread around the world, and all of a sudden on 9/11 or whatever, we start syncing up. There's some kind of collective conscious that is weirdly there that we're starting to measure. We don't really know how to, and it's kind of, I don't know that I don't want to say I don't know that we'll never know how to.
So consciousness is one thing and energy is another thing. When I say energy, what I directly mean is that another one of I don't talk about this frequently, but one of my other elements of study is essentially lucid dreaming, out of body experiences, our integral relationship to consciousness from outside of the context of what we perceive materially and physically. And so in the construct of a lucid dream, you can go both into, you can either walk into your dream or wake up in the middle of your dream. And you can either go into, all dreams are structured from the frames of your own conscious memory, being able to piece together material constructs to understand the field of energy, because you are perceiving that through a lens that exists half in your material body, just as you can perceive what's happening on an energetic perspective while you're awakened in your physical body. It's kind of the same but opposite view. And so in your lucid dream, you can go into your own consciousness, you can go into the collective unconsciousness, or you can project outward, and you can walk essentially into an out-of-body experience. And so what I actually mean by the study of consciousness and energy is not merely the consciousness that exists physically, materially, and in our brain, but simultaneously the consciousness that exists as a field that we can use to travel through in things like an out-of-body experience and things like experiencing a lucid dream. And so it's studying not only what exists physically, but what exists energetically in our non-physical body. That I find to be, that for me is what the next generation of scientific breakthrough will help us discover about our own quantum state of being.
Literally just completely changing the game. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Thank you so much for being such an amazing superhero and just doing all the beautiful work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.